My name is Jeremy, and tonight I am going to be speaking a little bit on kink and sexuality, and BDSM, and why is this even a topic to be talking about? A little bit about me. I am a sixth-year clinical psychology doctoral student in the PsyD program at Fuller Theological Seminary. I'm working on my PsyD in clinical psychology and a master's in theology. I specialize in specifically working with couples, relationships, sexuality, conflict. I actually really enjoy working with high conflict couples where one or both have experienced trauma, whether that's complex trauma, sexual trauma. Those are kind of the areas that I'm focused in. I also really do a lot of embodied work, so somatic work, like what's happening in the physical body and how that's connected to emotions. I was certified as a yoga teacher back in 2018 and really fell in love with that practice as a way of connecting with the body and emotions through movement and through breath, and really began to enjoy partner styles of yoga, partner yoga, acro yoga, that kind of stuff. And I decided that my research, what I was going to focus on, was using a style of yoga called trauma-centered, trauma-sensitive yoga that has been researched and shown to be effective at treating trauma, combining it with couples work and partner yoga to do a partner's modality for treating trauma. So I'm really excited about that, and a part of partners work is sex and sexuality, and finding ways to connect to a topic that is incredibly shame-laden because of a lot of the negative narratives that culture and unfortunately religion has created around those two things. So I am going to be recording this in a way that you can just turn it on audio and do something else. If moving around helps you, especially for our neurodivergent folks, shutting off and having to watch another video is incredibly fatiguing. And so if you want to just turn the video off, you're more than welcome to. So this is just going to be either you can watch or you can listen, but I'm not going to have any PowerPoints or anything that you need to pay attention to. I'll probably throw a few things out there for links to further your knowledge if you want that, but I'll also have that available that I can send to you as well too. So just listen to this and interact with it. If you have a question that pops up, write it down so that we can talk about it in class. I love questions, and this is just to kind of, I guess, whet your appetite a little bit. No pun intended. So without further ado, let's dive in. I have a kind of a guideline that I'm going to be reading from, and so if you see me kind of reading around on stuff, that's what I'm doing. I've got a few monitors and stuff around, but that's what I'm doing with that. So, encourage you to take a moment, get a bottle of water, take a few breaths, pay attention to what's happening in your body, and just notice any tensions, any subtle sensations, to just be present with yourself as we go through this, because talking about sex and sexuality a lot of times can bring up some feelings that might be a little bit hard to be with. And so if you need to pause this, if you need to break from it, please do so. Please do so. So first, why even have a conversation around this? What's so important about this? And while I know not necessarily all of you are thinking about becoming therapists, because the field of psychology is so wide and you can do a lot of things with it, taking human sexuality class tends to kind of lend towards either a personal interest in the subject, which for obvious reasons, or you are interested in becoming a therapist someday. And so I'm going to kind of be going at this from kind of a little bit of a therapist angle. I kind of wanted to say that out front. But these are things that you can kind of take and keep in the back of your head, even if you're not going in that direction in the future. But I think it's really important, first and foremost, because this is a topic that's been coming up a lot over the past 6 years, especially since 50 Shades of Grey came out. And 50 Shades of Grey, the movie, was not a great representation of what the BDSM and the kink community really are about. But it stirred up a lot of talk about it. And, songs like Rihanna's S&M, and then even recently Doja Cat's Freak. But, like, what exactly is BDSM and kink? We have all this stuff kind of popping up all over the place, and a lot of times people kind of hear it as just like this crazy sex stuff, If you're interested, I'm going to go ahead and throw out one resource right now. There's a book called Becoming a Kink-Aware Therapist, and this is something that there are a lot of articles being written on lately. If you go to Google and search kink-aware therapy, like, you can find therapists that are certified in this. And the big thing is it's a way of helping to depathologize sexual practices that for a long time have been looked down on and seen as pathological. So the book, if you're interested and you want to kind of dive in further, it's called Becoming a Kink-Aware Therapist, and it's by Carolyn Shabazz and Peter Chrysanos. Again, if you're really interested in it, I can link stuff to you, no problem. But the question, why talk about it? As it becomes popular, being in the field of human sexuality, it kind of has some of the mental and behavioral aspects to it. And so it winds up showing up in therapy rooms a lot. And as a therapist, if I come to my client with any kind of prejudgment of pathology on a desire or an action that they have, that's going to influence how I can be present with them and help them explore whatever it is that they want, what it is that they want. It's not about saying whether it's good or bad. It's about creating an atmosphere where they're able to explore to find out whether it's something that is benefiting them or whether it's something that's not benefiting them. But it's not my place to make that critique or make that judgment for them. And in the history of the therapy field, there has been somewhat of a pathologizing, a negative view, critique of anything in the BDSM and the kink world. A lot of people, whenever I ask, what do you think of it? And that might be a good exercise. Like, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of BDSM and kink? If you want to pause and make a note, I'd love to hear that in class. That's normally what I would start with. What comes to your mind when you think of this? So if you can make a note of that before I go on so that it's fresh and you can kind of compare, what you're thinking about it versus some of the stuff that I'm bringing tonight, that'd be a lot of fun to talk about. But so as it becomes more popular, it becomes something that we need to educate ourselves on. If we're going to be people in this mental health field, we need to know a little bit about what's going on with that. That ensures that we're able to hold that neutral stance. You also might check out kinkguidelines.com. It's a resource of tons of information. A lot of the stats and information that I pull come from there. Lots of terms to wrestle with and to figure out what they mean so that if you hear somebody talking about it, you understand. But really, so approximately 45 to 60% of people in the general population, they report having fantasies that involve some kind of aspect of submission and dominance. About 30% have fantasies that involve whipping and spanking. And in terms of behavior, it's estimated that about 10% of the general population has engaged in some kind of kink behavior at some point in their lives. And there's multiple studies that are showing this. Again, I can provide a lot of those links for you if you're interested in that, but quick Google search will bring up a lot of that stuff. The point is, people are doing this stuff, regardless of whether we're talking about it or not. It's happening, and lots of feelings and lots of emotions come up about it. A lot of people wind up feeling a lot of shame for it. I won't take a poll of the class to find out if any of those statistics represent the class, but chances are they probably do at some level. because it's a range of aspects. Kinky is really kind of defined as what's a bit outside of the norm. And I'll get into the definitions a little bit more in a minute, but when something falls outside of the norm, it tends to bring up feelings of, like, is this okay? Is this normal? Especially because we're not talking about it, there is nothing that can normalize it. It's kind of like if you've never had, I don't know, if you've never had chocolate and you try chocolate and it's good and you really enjoy it, you want to know, is this like a normal thing to enjoy? I don't know if that's a great example, but normalizing really kind of is like, okay, so it's okay to feel the things that I feel. And one researcher, and his name escapes me, but I'll bring it up later for you, talks about an arousal template. That's something that you can also Google. But whatever is a part of a person's arousal template is a part of their natural expression of arousal and sexuality, and it's a part of who they are. And so we want to be really careful about going in and saying, making judgments on whether a part of who they are is good or bad, from the therapy perspective, and helping them to find ways to find that within themselves. So diving in, before talking about really any of this, the definitions, what it is, what it means, the first and foremost thing is consent, consent, consent. Consent is mandatory. If you ever find yourself in a BDSM 101 class, whether it's online or in person or whatever, the first thing that they're going to be talking about is consent. It's one of the things that this community does really well that actually they could do a good job of teaching the non-kink, non-BDSM, kind of the mainstream community better. Like, the mainstream community could take a page from it, because consent is vital for creating the dynamics that you hear about. And when it's not there, it becomes incredibly unsafe and it becomes abusive. And that's kind of one of the problems that happens in the movie 50 Shades of Grey, is the consent piece. While there's the contract that happens, for those of you that have seen it, there's a bit of a coercive element that's not, that makes it kind of problematic. But that's just my view on it. There's lots of views out there. You can, again, Google that as well. But consent is, it's given in, it has to be given in a uncoerced, and it has to be enthusiastic, has to be clear, and the boundaries have to be very clearly outlined. And that's what makes a BDSM or a kink encounter, or they're called scenes, setting up a scene. That's what makes it safe. It makes it inclusive for all partners. Consent and boundaries can be outlined in a formal contract, and talking about that stuff can actually be kind of part of the experience. It can be a verbal agreement. It can be a casual conversation. But the idea is to be able to talk about the things that each person wants and the things that aren't on the table for the process, for the scene. Consent's also not absolute. The desires and comfort of the sexual partners in a BDSM scene are of the utmost value. If either partner becomes uncomfortable at any time during the experience or after, they can take back consent. The other partners, they need to respect that. Even if it's a change, without taking it personally and taking it to heart. Now, they can feel disappointed. That's a normal feeling to come up. But that removal of consent is a piece that is really important, because sometimes feelings change. Sometimes stuff bubbles to the surface and it's like, I need to stop. I'm not quite comfortable with this anymore. And this has incredible implications for many other kind of relational encounters with people. Let's say you're out on a date with somebody and all of a sudden you feel like, this just isn't where I want to be. There's something about this that doesn't feel safe and I don't know what it is. Being able to say, hey, I think I want to go ahead and end the date, that's something that needs to be able to happen. And, you know, of course, as a cisgendered white male, there's going to be a lot less risk for me to say that to a woman or another man on a date than it is for a woman to say that. And so there's a bit of a power dynamic there that I'm aware of. But if we had this radical consent explicit agreement, then it would become a lot safer to be able to say, hey, I'm not really feeling this anymore. Can we stop? Regardless of what it is. So part of the way that consent can be talked about is through previously agreed upon safe words. You know, I think we've all heard kind of the jokes, you know, pineapple or, you know, whatever the case is in the middle of something. But really, truly, it's a signal that says we need to stop. Because sometimes when you're in the middle of feeling triggered or feeling activated, you're not really able to think clearly enough to say, hey, I need to stop, and this is why. You need something to be able to say, I've got to stop this right now. Limits or boundaries can also take a lot of different forms. There's some soft limits where basically it's like saying a BDSM partner is able to say, I'm uncomfortable with this, but I'm willing to give it a try as long as you understand that we're going to have to go slow and I might need to stop things. That's why safe words are so important. Hard limits, on the other hand, are a complete no-no. It's a boundary. We don't push that at all. One way that you can do this is through a color system. It's red, green, and yellow. Green, everything is good. Please continue. Yellow is, hey, this thing that we're doing, the specific thing that we're doing, it's really starting to push me towards this kind of emotional or physical place where I don't know if I want to keep going. I want to keep going because I'm curious of how to explore this emotional or this physical boundary or this pleasure boundary. I haven't quite gone here before and I don't know what it means. But I need you to be a little bit softer and go a little bit slower because, you know, yellow light, let's caution. Red is we have to stop the thing that we're doing, but I want to do something else. We're not stopping the whole scene or the whole engagement. That's the safe word. So green, yellow, and red. And then again, the safe word, everything stops now. There's a few different styles of consent in the BDSM and kink community, different ways of thinking about consent. There's SSC, which is safe, sane, and consensual. Basically, it's based on safe activities. All participants are sufficiently sound of mind to consent, and that all participants do consent. It's a way of thinking about consent. There's also something called RISC, R-I-S-C, which is risk-aware consensual kink. And that's kind of talking about all participants know the risks that are involved, because BDSM activities aren't always risk-free. Like in bondage with ropes and stuff like that, you can cut off circulation. There can be nerve damage. People that do tying professionally, they actually, like really good ones, go through like EMT type training to understand nerves and circulation and stuff like that. It's a big deal. Consensual in this context means that all the participants have freely consented to the activity and that no one has been coerced. RAC was developed kind of in reaction to SSC because even though they're similar, they differ in that RAC acknowledges that some BDSM activities aren't completely risk-free or safe. Remember, SSC is safe, sane, and consensual. So RAC emphasizes the personal responsibility for everyone to understand the risks that are involved in some of the BDSM activities, and the participants need to accept those risks in order to participate. In kind of reaction to that one, something called PRIC came about. All of these acronyms are just so great, right? This is personal responsibility informed consensual kink, and it describes a philosophical view held as kind of a reaction to risk, and it emphasizes personal responsibility of the participants involved in the risky sexual behavior, who have to individually consent to the behaviors after personally understanding and considering the risks. How it kind of pushes back is there are some critics of RAC saying that the RAC philosophy didn't stress that the individuals had a personal responsibility, or that they It didn't stress that individuals had a personal responsibility to accept or reject risky behaviors and live in the consequences of their choices. The critics of PRIC suggest that while it sounds good on paper, it's impossible to be truly informed about anything that you haven't experienced yet. A person can tell you what's involved, but your personal emotional response can't be assessed until you take the leap, until you experience it. This makes it really difficult to truly accept personal responsibility for the risky behaviors you're engaging in. Now, some just general definitions of kink and BDSM, and we're just going to kind of wrap up with some of the basic definitions of stuff, and then maybe have a little bit more of a conversation in class. So BDSM and kink is kind of contrasted to vanilla. Those are kind of the two opposites. The mainstream, we in the kink community call those people vanilla. Vanilla is also great. We just like having a bit more flavor than only vanilla. People that only want vanilla, that's absolutely 100% okay too. So kink, think about kink. Good definition is it's a non-conventional and non-normative sexual practice, concept, or fantasy. It's an umbrella term used to address a wide range of atypical sexual, erotic, pleasurable, fun, intimate, and or self-expressive interests and behaviors. The vanilla is more conventional and normative. So common types of kink are like behavior modification, bondage, edge play, orgasm control. It can be psychological bondage or rope bondage. Impact play, which is like spanking and stuff. Sensation play, which is like experimenting with ice or, wax. It can be, having a feather draped over skin, stuff like that. One little thing with rope is sometimes people want to experience like the sensation of rope from, if you've ever heard of a deep pressure stimulation. It's like what happens when you put a weighty blanket and there's like this soothing effect that happens. There's a lot of really interesting research out there on that, and how rope bondage can actually bring that about. And so sometimes the consent agreement is the person says, I don't want this to be a sexual encounter, but I want to experience, being tied up. So I'm going to keep my clothes on. There's going to be no sexual contact. And then the partner that they're playing with, if they choose to accept that, then they accept that, and it only involves just simply tying for that constriction feeling. BDSM, the definition for that, it stands for bondage and discipline, which is the BD. Also stands for dominance and submission, which is a DS, and then also stands for sadism and masochism. So it can involve sex, but it doesn't always have to, kind of like the example that I gave of the bondage. Discipline refers to a series of rules and punishments. Usually it's agreed upon before the sexual encounter begins, and it typically is for a dominant partner to exert control over the actions of the submissive partner. Both people are choosing in consensual agreement to be in both of those roles. Neither one of those are coerced. It's a choice for both people. Full agency. Dominance has to do with the act of dominating a sexual partner, and it can be both inside of a sexual relationship and it could be outside of a sexual relationship. Sometimes dominants have arrangements with their sexual partners in which they dictate not only their partner's behaviors in bed, but out of it. So like food habits, sleep patterns, they exert control. That's kind of what the dominance means, exert control. Submission, on the other hand, it's the act of submissively following the dominant's suggestions. They don't have as much control over deciding what happens to them as their dominant does. Communication between the dominant and submissive is of the utmost importance. That's how boundaries are set, desires are shared, and permission is accepted. So whereas the dominant exerts control, the submissive accepts control. Again, they're in a position of choosing that. Now, one question that you might ask, or that I'm going to ask, and I'm not going to provide the answer to because I want you to think about this, in a relationship between somebody that's dominant and submissive, who is in control? So think about that. Who is in control? You might also ask, who has power in that interaction? So think about that, and maybe when we all meet together, we can talk about that a little bit more. So sadism and masochism, or the last part of the BDSM, or sadomasochism. It's the pleasure that a BDSM participant derives from either inflicting pain or receiving pain, called intense sensation play. BDSM can involve hitting, pinching, or causing some other kind of physical harm to the sexual partner, but it's all consensual. Consent, again, is the key to healthy expression of sadomasochism, with an understanding that all partners, that the activity, it could stop at any point. Any person could say, we have to stop. No matter what the reason. It could be because of the intensity of the play. It could be because a feeling is coming up. Whatever the case is, if it stops, it stops. I'm going to keep repeating that. So the sadist gives sensation or experience, and the masochist receives sensation or experience. So while it typically is defined as the pain aspect, sometimes it's not actually about the pain part. Sometimes it can be in a different way. So I like to think of it as sadist gives, masochist receives. And that's where a lot of times the psychological community in the past has pathologized, is there's been this view of a sadomasochistic interaction is only a bad thing. It's enacting a trauma. And while that absolutely can be the case, if it becomes a part of, or if it is a part of a person's arousal template, that is okay. Again, consent is key. People tend to believe that the most important thing about a BDSM relationship is the kink and the sex play. But in reality, what people need to focus on is communication and something called aftercare. The BDSM scene can be very powerful and intense. Both with your body and your mind, they endure a range of chemical responses that can really affect you. Regardless of whether you're a dom or a sub, you'll need to spend time after session with your partner to go through what's called the aftercare process. It can be cuddling, it can be caring for bruises or pinch marks. It could be meditating, it could be praying, it could be talking with your partner. What did you like? What did you not like? What can I do better next time? It is absolutely essential for the health of a BDSM relationship. Aftercare can even be thought of in a vanilla relationship, where two people get done having non-BDSM or non-kink sex or vanilla sex, and get done and they just talk. What did you like? What did you not like? Did any feelings come up for you? Do you need to be held right now? Do you need a little bit of space? Do you want some water? Those would be all considered aftercare things. It needs to happen for everybody. Most of the stuff that you'll see out there is aftercare for the submissive, but aftercare needs to happen for the dominant as well. For the submissive, sometimes it's like physical contact, massages, soothing sore areas, relaxing activities. For the dominant, it may be coming to terms with things that they said or did during a scene, and feelings or behaviors that they might find troubling. Guilt is a very common feeling for even very experienced dominants who might suddenly wonder, if there's some kind of a monster that can enjoy hurting somebody. What happens is, in the middle of a scene, there's a lot of endorphins and a lot of pleasurable things that are going on in the body. And when you come down from that, it can flood a lot of it can create a lot of scary feelings with that. But remember, with this pain aspect, sometimes it's shocking for people. For others, it's not shocking. But remember that the pain and the pleasure center in the brain are wired really close together. And this is an area that there's a lot of research on how those can be pleasurable. And when pain happens in the body, your body releases opioids, it releases endorphins, it releases dopamine, it releases a lot of things that make you feel really, really good. So when you hear people talking about BDSM, it's not just about the bondage or the discipline. It's about a mixture of different relationship dynamics. The relationship dynamics can instill agency, respect somebody else's agency, personal autonomy, responsibility. It's not just simply acting out aggression. It's about fully showing up vulnerably and surrendering to an interaction. There are a lot of misconceptions out there about BDSM and the couples that engage in it. Some assume that BDSM activities encourage very promiscuous behavior at the deterioration of a relationship. But in reality, it's the opposite. It doesn't mean that having a vanilla sex life is harmful or a BDSM sex life is harmful. It's just that everyone has their own preferences. It also doesn't mean that if you try BDSM and you don't like it, it's not a bad thing. It's not everybody's forte either. So the power exchange is really an exchange of vulnerabilities. Both people, like I said, have to show up in very vulnerable, powerful ways. The dominant person, the one that is giving the experience, has to show up with their full authentic wants and desires and not hold back, which is really hard. The submissive accepts all of the dominant's desires and actions within the negotiated consensual scene. Some of the benefits, there's actually quite a few articles out there on the benefits. People who practice BDSM have higher levels of communication than those who do not. They're not easy conversations to have, and you have to learn how to communicate at a different level. They learn how to communicate personal boundaries and limitations in a really, really strong way, without it being judgmental or accusatory or critical. In 2013, the International Society for Sexual Medicine published a study about the psychological characteristics of BDSM practitioners. They focus on a bunch of things, like the well-being of BDSM practitioners. They found that individuals in BDSM relationships were more well-adjusted, open-minded, and secure in their personal relationship than those who weren't. Now, this is this specific study, and I'd encourage you, as people getting into the mental health field, go read the study. Go look at the participants that they selected. Go look at the research and how it was set up, and look at those things, because it's not saying that people who don't engage in BDSM aren't those things. It's that they found that people that did engage in BDSM over the people in their study that didn't have these benefits. And you need to see, is this a generalizable study? So in other words, the study found that there was a positive mental health and positive relationship aspect of the BDSM relationships. They also found that people that engaged in BDSM activities reduced levels of psychological distress. Similar to getting into like a runner's high, or what happens in meditation, or the yoga buzz, if you've ever heard of that before, dreaming, daydreaming, all of those kind of things, similar experiences. These people had decreased levels of cortisol, which is a stress hormone. They had increases, their relationship felt more connected and more intimate. And for a lot of people, the study showed for a lot of people, there was kind of this assumption that in BDSM it promotes like cheating, but in actuality, BDSM encourages more healthy and more trusting relationships because of the increased communication that winds up happening. So I think I'm going to go ahead and stop there on some of just the general explanations of it. If you have questions, jot them down. I'm excited to chat with you about those things. And I look forward to chatting with you in class. Have a good evening.